Hello and welcome to another edition of Should You Play, where we find out whether or not you should play Dawn of War 2 Retribution. Retribution is a real-time strategy game, more emphasis on the strategy part since you don't actually build any bases like you normally do in most other real-time strategy games. But more on that later. For now, let's talk about the three different parts of the game: the campaign, the multiplayer, and Last Stand. The campaign lets you play as 6 different races in the 40,000 universe. Eliphas of the Chaos Space Marines, the Tyrannid Hive Lord of Hive Fleet Leviathan, Captain Bloodflag of the Freebooters Orcs, Autarch Caliph of the Eldar Craftworld Alitok, Captain Diomedes of the Bloodravens chapter of Space Marines, and Lord General Castor of the Imperial Guard of Cadia. The campaign for each race is about 6 to 8 hours. If you play all the races, you're looking at about 30 hours of gameplay. Unfortunately, the missions are mostly carbon copies of each other. Whether you're playing as the Bloodravens or the Freebooters Orcs, it doesn't matter. The mission is identical and the enemy is almost always the same. Even if you're playing Orcs, you still have to fight Orcs in certain missions. However, each race has a different ending, and if you're a fan of 40k or just a completionist, it's totally worth it to finish up each race. The campaign itself focuses on the story of the Aurelia sector, 10 years after the events of Chaos Rising. Chapter Master Azariah Kairos of the Bloodravens is actually in league with the forces of Chaos and is attempting to plunge the whole sector into eternal war and damnation. The Imperium of Man is done with the sector and has sent the Ordo Malleus, a giant fleet of ships which performs the Exterminatus, which is more or less the bombing of a planet to the point where it can no longer support life. Based on which race you're playing, you either attempt to stop the Exterminatus or achieve your goal before the event concludes. Gameplay is rather interesting. You don't actually control a full army, but rather a small squad of elite soldiers. You can choose to either take a named character, or swap them out for an elite squad that is similar to the named character's weapon or style. You can take a total of 4 characters, or 3 squads in a character, or any variation on that formula. The characters level up as they progress through the campaign, and can equip weapons and gear that you find or collect through the missions, much like your typical RPG. When a hero falls in combat, you can simply move one of your other heroes to revive them. In some cases, it's more beneficial to actually suicide one of your heroes to save another, since the gear and weapon combinations can make certain heroes extremely effective in many situations. Speaking of which, the mission briefing before you confirm your squads will tell you if you're going up against hordes of enemies, vehicles, or elite squads, allowing you to pick and choose what gear you'll take before the mission. Aside from that, most missions are your typical start at point A, then fight your way to point B. You'll get some variants, like blow up certain buildings or kill certain units, but these don't happen all too often. At this point, I'll stop to avoid those horrid, devilish spoilers, but that's more or less the basics of the campaign mode. Next up on the list is multiplayer. Basically, it's your standard multiplayer system. You've got 2 different game modes. Your first is Annihilation, which includes free-for-all and team deathmatch, which is exactly as it sounds. You spend the whole game fighting your opponent until you've gained an advantage. Then, you destroy their HQ building. The second mode available is called Victory Point Control. In this game mode, you must hold at least 2 of the 3 available victory points on the map. To do this, you simply walk up to a victory point and capture it with a non-vehicle unit. There are 3 different point values available: 250 for a short game, 500 for an average game, and 1000 for a longer game. Whether you're playing Annihilation or Victory Point Control, the actual gameplay itself is exactly the same. You need to collect 2 different kinds of resources which you'll use to build squads from your HQ building. The first is called Requisition. All squads you build from your HQ require requisition, so it's important that you get a steady flow of the stuff. Requisition points are scattered across the map, and the longer you hold a requisition point, the more you get from it. Be warned, if an enemy claims it, you lose both the requisition from it as well as the increased amount. Once you take it back, you start from the lowest value once again, so protect your requisition. The second resource you'll need to claim is simply called Power. Power nodes, much like requisition points, are scattered around the map. With power nodes, you can upgrade the nodes to give you additional power, which also gives them armor, preventing your enemy from stealing your power. You can also purchase additional power after the armor upgrade is complete. This allows you to focus on defending your requisition, giving you the time to react to incoming enemy forces. You'll need power to upgrade your existing squads, as well as upgrading your HQ, so they allow the purchase of more advanced squads. Speaking of, like mentioned before, you don't actually build a base in multiplayer. You start the game with a single building, your HQ. From this building, you build all of your vehicles and squads using the aforementioned requisition and power. Your HQ building can be upgraded a total of 2 times, unlocking your Tier 2 units, which are generally much stronger than your Tier 1 units, and your Tier 3 units, which are typically a tank-like vehicle and your race's super unit. Much like the single player, you have all 6 races available to you for use in multiplayer. Some races, such as the Orcs, excel at melee combat, whilst others, like the Imperial Guard, are great ranged fighters. Despite these advantages, no race is actually overpowered, and games are quite balanced, if a bit slow. Lastly, before the game begins, you are given the choice of which champion you'll take with you into the game. They are divided into 3 categories. The first is offense. These champions excel at murdering your opponents. They have high health and high damage, but typically are very slow moving, making quick response difficult. The second is defense. These champions are often some form of mechanic, excelling at constructing turrets and repairing damaged buildings or vehicles you own. They also typically have an array of anti-vehicle weapons in their arsenal. The last is support. These champions are typically spellcasters of some sort, and support your army through healing or protective barriers, or in some rare cases, using stealth to sneak around large groups to destroy vulnerable targets. The most important and exciting part of your chosen champion is customization. You're given a wide plethora of options to customize your champion to better suit a situation, spending requisition and power to acquire these items. Once an item is bought, you may once again re-equip it to use in different situations.
The Witchblade is mine.
The champion selection screen is also where you choose your army colors. You can use the ones available, which typically use the army colors from the 40k universe. You may also create your own color schemes, using many of the colors used in the Games Workshop paint line. You're quite free in what colors you choose, creating some potentially hilarious combinations. And now for the last mode available in Retribution, arguably the greatest part of the game. It's so great, it even has its own standalone game, which is essentially just this mode without the single player campaign or the multiplayer. It's called Last Stand. In Last Stand, you choose between 7 available heroes, the last of which is actually DLC. These are the Eldar Farseer, the Orc Mech Boy, the Space Marine Captain, the Tyranid Hive Tyrant, the Chaos Space Marine Sorcerer, the Imperial Guard Lord General, and lastly, the DLC character, the Tau Empire Chasse-O Commander. Once your hero is selected, you are shown an equip screen, much like single player, where you choose what loadout you will use for that particular session of Last Stand. As you level up your character, you unlock different weapons and armor, until you reach the 20th level, where you can choose to upgrade to Elite status, which works just like your Call of Duty Prestige system. When you upgrade, you are given a token, which improves your score for that session. This token is permanent. You can upgrade a total of 3 times, improving the token each time. The objective of Last Stand is very simple. You and 2 other players must fight and survive against a total of 20 waves of varied enemies. Every few waves, you fight a harder wave, with the 10th, 16th, and 20th wave being boss waves. There are 2 different game modes available for play, the Bloodied Colosseum and the Anvil of Khorne. Both have 20 waves, but the Anvil of Khorne is far harder, sort of like your hardcore mode. Reviving an allied champion in Last Stand works just like it does in single player or multiplayer. Just move your champion over and click on them. And that's basically Last Stand in a nutshell, more or less. And that's what Dawn of War 2 Retribution is. It's these 3 game modes combined into a rather compelling and, to be honest, very fun game. Hopefully, this has provided you with enough information to decide whether or not you should play Dawn of War 2 Retribution.